There are some things you don't find out about your mother until she's gone. Vivienne Calloway found that out on a Tuesday in October, kneeling on the cold concrete floor of a storage unit in Beaumont, Texas, surrounded by 40 years of a life she thought she knew. She wasn't supposed to be there. She was supposed to be at work, or what used to be work, before the layoffs hit the county clerk's office and took her desk along with 11 others. She was supposed to be in the house she shared with her husband, or what used to be her husband, before he handed her a stack of papers and told her he'd met someone else. That was 8 months ago. The divorce had been final for 3, so no. Vivienne wasn't supposed to be a lot of things, but here she was, 53 years old, sitting cross-legged on the floor of Unit 114 at Sunrise Storage, holding a cardboard box labeled Eleanor, kitchen misc, wondering if her mother had left behind anything worth saving. And if you've ever had to close out someone's storage unit after they passed, if you've ever had to be the one to decide what stays and what goes, then you already know what that feels like. You already know that hollow, echoing kind of grief that doesn't cry, it just sits. Stick with us, because what Vivienne found in that storage unit was about to change everything she thought, she understood, about her mother, about herself, and about what it means to leave something behind. If this is your first time here at Giant Stories, welcome. Hit that subscribe button before we go any further, because we tell stories like this one every week. The ones that don't make the news, but stay with you for the rest of your life. Eleanor Marsh had died in August quietly, the way she'd done most things. A stroke in her sleep, the doctor said. Peaceful. Vivienne had gotten the call at 6 in the morning from the neighbor Patty Odom, who'd noticed Eleanor's porch light was still on at noon and gone to check. The porch light, still on at noon. That detail had burrowed into Vivienne and hadn't left. Eleanor was 78. She'd spent most of her adult life in a small house on Calder Avenue, with a garden that got too much sun and a screen door that never latched right. She had lived simply. Worked as a seamstress out of her back bedroom for decades, taking in alterations and repairs for people all over that part of Beaumont. She wasn't famous. She wasn't wealthy. She didn't have a dramatic story as far as Vivienne had known. As far as Vivienne had known. The storage unit had come as a surprise. Vivienne hadn't known it existed until the attorney handed her the key during the estate meeting, a small flat key on a plain ring with a laminated tag. Unit 114, Sunrise Storage, Calder Ave location. The attorney had said he didn't know what was inside. Eleanor had been paying the monthly rent out of pocket for at least 6 years. The bill had been on auto-pay from an account Vivienne had never heard of. A private account, for a storage unit. That her mother had never mentioned. Do you know anything about this? Vivienne had asked her brother Roland, who'd driven up from Houston for the estate meeting and spent most of it checking his phone. Roland had shrugged. Mom had her quirks. That was all he said. That was all he ever said. Vivienne had driven to Unit 114 the following Tuesday, with a box of contractor bags and an expectation of finding old fabric scraps. Maybe some furniture she could donate. She told herself she'd be in and out in 2 hours. She was there for 6. The unit was organized. That was the first thing she noticed. Not jam-packed the way most storage units get, not chaotic. There were shelves along one wall, real wooden shelves that someone had built and installed deliberately. Boxes were labeled in Eleanor's handwriting. Her neat, slanted cursive that Vivienne had grown up seeing on grocery lists and birthday cards. Kitchen misc, fabric. Wool, fabric. Cotton Prince Pato albums, 1970s. Wes was Vivienne's father, dead 22 years. There was a wooden rocking chair in the corner draped with a quilt Vivienne recognized from childhood. A sewing machine, covered in a cotton sheet. A lamp with a yellowed shade. Everything had been placed with care. Vivienne walked the perimeter slowly, trailing her fingers along the edges of boxes. She felt like she was in someone else's house. In a way, she supposed she was. This had been her mother's private space, and the privacy of it pressed against her chest in a way she wasn't prepared for. In the back left corner, behind a stack of boxes labeled Miscegenments, there was a chest. Not a cardboard box, not a plastic bin. An actual wooden chest, the old kind, with a flat top and iron hinges that had gone orange with rust. It had a padlock on the front clasp, a padlock that used the same small key she'd been given at the attorney's office. Vivienne stood in front of it for a long moment. She thought about her mother's hands. How they'd always been moving. Threading needles, pressing seams, folding fabric. Hands that were never still because idle hands made Eleanor nervous. That was something Eleanor had said her whole life, like a prayer she'd memorized young. Idle hands get you into trouble, Vivienne. She crouched down and fit the key into the lock. It opened on the first try. Inside the chest there were three things. A green metal cash box, the kind with a tray insert and a simple push-button latch. A leather journal, dark brown, worn soft at the corners. And a folded piece of paper on top of everything, with Vivienne's name on it in her mother's handwriting. Vivienne picked up the paper first. Viv, if you're reading this, then I suppose I didn't get around to telling you in person. I kept meaning to. I just never found the right time, and then I suppose time ran out. Everything in this box is yours, not Roland's yours. I hope you'll understand why when you see it. I hope you won't be angry with me. I think you'll know what to do. You always did, love, Mom. Vivienne read it twice. Then she sat down on the concrete floor, right there in front of the chest, and she opened the journal. And that's where the story really begins. The journal wasn't a diary in the way most people think of one. It didn't have dates and feelings and descriptions of the weather. It was more like a ledger, a record. The pages were divided into rough columns, a name, a date, a short note, and sometimes an amount. The first entry was from 1987. Donna Tremblay, March. Coat and dress for job interview, wouldn't take money. Left $20 anyway. Vivienne turned the page. Curtis and Ida Mae Fontenot, May. Altered Curtis's uniform. 2 pairs of pants, 1 jacket. Free, they're behind on rent. Another page. Sheila. July, homecoming dress for her daughter Tamara. Sheila cried when I told her there was no charge. Said she'd been turning it over in her mind how to tell Tamara they couldn't afford it. Tamara is 15. Doesn't know. The entries kept going. Page after page, year after year. Names Vivienne didn't recognize. Names she half remembered from childhood. People who'd come to the back door of the house on Calder Avenue, with garments draped over their arms. People her mother would usher into the sewing room and close the door behind. People Vivienne had thought were just customers. They hadn't all been customers. Or rather, they had been, but they hadn't all paid. Eleanor Marsh had been running a quiet operation out of her sewing room for decades. People came to her with alterations, with repairs, with dresses for funerals and suits for job interviews, and sometimes just a coat that needed the lining put back in before winter. And Eleanor charged what she charged, but if someone couldn't pay, the journal showed she found a way. She adjusted the price, she absorbed the cost, she let it go, and she wrote it down. Not to collect, not to shame. She wrote it down to remember them. Vivienne read for over an hour without moving. A man named Gerald Broussard, who'd needed his late wife's dress altered to fit his daughter for a scholarship ceremony. A teenage girl referred to only as the Kingsley girl from 3rd Street, who'd come in with prom fabric. Her grandmother had bought at a discount store, cut wrong, and Eleanor had recut it, and put in the invisible zipper without charging anything because, as Eleanor had written, she worked so hard and shouldn't have to worry about a zipper. An elderly veteran who'd come in needing his dress uniform pressed and repaired for his brother's military funeral, who'd offered to pay in installments, and Eleanor had said simply, "Go be with your family." The entry just said no charge. Some things are more important. By the time Vivienne was halfway through the journal, she had stopped reading with her eyes alone. Her whole chest was involved. Now here's what we have to tell you. Because this is the part that matters. Eleanor Marsh was not a wealthy woman. She's never had been. She ran that sewing room out of the back of a small house on a street where most people didn't have much. And she did it for 40+ years, and she charged fair prices, and when those prices were too much she charged less, and when less was still too much she charged nothing, and she never told anyone. Not Vivienne, not Roland, not the neighbor Patty Odom who'd lived next door for 30 years, nobody. It wasn't because she was ashamed. Vivienne understood that, reading the journal. It wasn't false modesty either. It was something quieter and more deliberate. Eleanor had simply believed that if you made a point of your own generosity, it stopped being generosity, it became performance, and Eleanor Marsh did not perform. The cash box had $200 in it, all small bills, rubber banded into packets. There was a handwritten note tucked under the tray. "This is not from the estate. I saved it separately, a little at a time. It's for you, Viv, for whatever you need most, no strings. $4,200. Saved in small amounts over who knows how long and set aside. Not for the house, not for the funeral expenses. For Vivienne. Her mother had somehow known, or maybe just hoped, that Vivienne might need it. Vivienne sat there on that cold concrete floor and she let herself cry. Not the polished kind of crying you do at a funeral when people are watching, the other kind. The kind that comes out ugly and real and doesn't stop just because you want it to. Roland called that evening. He'd been thinking about the estate, he said, about the house, about what it might sell for now that the market had come back around. There's a guy I know, Roland said. Real estate. He could probably move it fast. We'd split whatever we clear after the debts. There aren't many debts, Vivienne said. Still, split down the middle, it's fair, right? 50-50. Vivienne was quiet for a moment. She was sitting at the kitchen table in the apartment she'd rented after the divorce. A one-bedroom in a complex off the highway. Temporary, everything about it feeling like a waiting room. I need to look through a few more things first, she said. Sure. Don't take too long, though. Carrying costs add up. After she hung up, she opened the journal to a page near the middle. There was an entry she'd read twice already, from 2009. A woman came in today with a bridesmaid dress that had been ruined by a dry cleaner. Bleach on the bodice. Her sister's wedding is in 4 days and she is beside herself. She has nothing. I looked at what I had on hand and we spent 3 hours together making something new from a bolt of ivory dupioni I'd been holding onto. It wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful. She kept saying she didn't know how to repay me, and I told her that wasn't the point. The point is she'll be standing next to her sister on Saturday. That's the whole point. Vivienne closed the journal. She picked up her phone and called a friend who worked in local preservation, someone she'd known for 20 years, someone she trusted. "Can I ask you something?" she said when her friend picked up. "If I wanted to keep a property in the family instead of selling, what would I actually need to do?" The next few weeks were not easy. We want to be honest with you about that, because the people who tell you these kinds of stories sometimes skip over the hard parts, and the hard parts are important. Roland did not take it well when Vivienne told him she wasn't ready to sell the house. "You're being sentimental," he said. "We both need the money." "I need the house," Vivienne said. "Why?" "You can't afford to keep it up." "I'm going to figure that out, Vivienne." "Roland." She said his name the way their mother used to, flat and final. "I'll buy out your share. I need time to arrange it." "Give me 60 days, he argued. He pushed. He brought up the market and carrying costs and what he called the practical reality of the situation. Vivienne let him talk. She didn't change her position. It took 53 days and a small personal loan to do it, plus the $4,200 from the cash box, and some savings she hadn't touched during the divorce because she'd been too scared to look at them. But at the end of those 53 days, the house on Calder Avenue was hers, just hers. She moved in on a Thursday, with her boxes from the one-bedroom apartment, and the rocking chair from the storage unit, and the chest and the journal, and the cash box and the sewing machine, still covered in its cotton sheet, which she set up in the back bedroom. The back bedroom that had always been her mother's sewing room. Vivienne stood in the doorway for a long time before she went in. The first person who knocked on the door of the sewing room came 3 weeks after Vivienne moved in. She was still unpacking, still figuring out what to do with the garden out back, which had gone to seed over the summer. Still learning the particular sounds of the house, the way the furnace ticked on cold mornings, the way the screen door on the side didn't latch right. Some things hadn't changed. The knock was at the front door, not the sewing room entrance, which had its own side door that people used to come to when Eleanor was in business. But Vivienne answered it anyway. A woman stood on the porch, probably late 30s, in a winter coat that was doing its best. She had a garment bag folded over one arm and she looked nervous, the way people do when they're not sure they're in the right place. "I'm sorry," the woman said. "I know Eleanor passed. Patty next door mentioned it when I called the old number. I didn't know where else to go." Her name was Sandra. She needed a dress altered for a job interview, her first real interview in 2 years. She'd bought the dress secondhand, good quality, but a size too large in the shoulders and through the waist. She wanted to know if Vivienne knew anyone who could help. Vivienne looked at the garment bag. She looked at Sandra's face. "Come on in," she said. "Let me take a look." She hadn't sewn anything in years. Her mother had tried to teach her as a girl, and Vivienne had been impatient, more interested in getting outside, and Eleanor had let her go without making her feel bad about it. But the knowledge had settled somewhere in the back of her, the way things do when you learn them young, and when she sat down at the machine that afternoon with Sandra's dress pinned and marked, it came back to her the way breathing comes back. Unconsciously, necessarily. She did the alterations in 2 sessions. Sandra came back for a fitting, and the dress was right. Schultz orange clean, waist taken in properly, the kind of fit that makes a person stand differently. "What do I owe you?" Sandra asked. Vivienne thought about it. "It was my first real job back at the machine," she said. "Call it practice. Come back and tell me how the interview goes." Sandra looked like she might argue. Then she looked at the room, the wooden shelves, the good light, the machine under the window that had been there for 30 years, and something in her face settled. "I'll tell you how it goes," she said. She got the job. She came back 2 weeks later to say so, and to bring a plant for the windowsill, something in a terracotta pot, and Vivienne put it on the sill next to the machine where it got the afternoon light. The journal was still on the work table in the corner of the sewing room. Vivienne hadn't put it away. She'd read it through twice now, all the way to the last entry, which was dated March of the previous year, just a few months before Eleanor got sick, though they hadn't known then that she was sick. The last entry was short. "A young man came in today with a baby's christening gown that had been in his family for 4 generations. The lace was separating from the bodice and 2 of the tuck pleats had come out. He was so worried about it. We sat together and I showed him what had come undone and explained how I'd fix it, and by the end he wasn't worried anymore," he said. "How do you always know what to do?" And I said, "You look carefully at what's broken and you start with what you can reach. That's all it is. You look carefully at what's broken and you start with what you can reach." Vivienne had written that sentence on a piece of paper and taped it to the wall above the machine. She looked at it every morning when she sat down to work. Because she was working now, she'd let it be known, through Patty, through Sandra, through word of mouth, the way things always spread on that street, that the sewing room on Calder was open again. She wasn't advertising, she wasn't running a business exactly, not yet. But people came. They came because they remembered Eleanor, or because a friend of a friend had mentioned it, or because they were walking by and saw the light on in the side window, and something made them knock, and Vivienne let them in. We want to pause right here for a second, because this is the part that the comments on this kind of story always come back to. This is the part people sit with. It would have been easy. It would have been understandable for Vivienne to sell that house. She was 53 years old with no job, a divorce still fresh enough to sting, and savings that weren't going to last forever. Roland wasn't wrong that the practical math was hard. He was just wrong about what the practical reality was, because what Roland couldn't see, and what Vivienne was only beginning to understand, was what her mother had actually left her. Not the house, not the $200, not even the sewing machine. Eleanor Marsh had left her daughter a practice, a way of moving through the world. A habit of opening the door when someone knocked and asking what they needed before you asked what they could give. And that inheritance doesn't show up in an estate filing. You can't put it in a probate document, but it is absolutely real, and it changes what you do next. If this story is speaking to you, if you've ever been on either side of this kind of quiet exchange, the giving or the receiving, let us know in the comments. We read every single one. By the following spring, the sewing room on Calder Avenue had a waiting list. Vivienne was not getting rich. She was careful about that. She charged fair prices, real prices, because she had rent and utilities and groceries like everyone else, and Eleanor herself had understood that you couldn't sustain something you weren't feeding. But she also had the journal, and she kept it open on the work table. And sometimes when someone came in and the money wasn't there, and the need clearly was, she did what her mother had done. She made a note. Her handwriting wasn't as neat as Eleanor's. But it would do. There was one afternoon in early April that she came back to often in her mind afterward. A woman had called asking about a wedding dress. Her own, she said. She'd gotten engaged and the dress had been her grandmother's, packed away for 40 years, and she was scared to look at it but couldn't afford a new one. Her name was Corinne. She came in on a Wednesday with the dress in a box, her hands shaking a little as she lifted the tissue paper aside. The dress was ivory silk, real silk, the kind they don't make the same way anymore. There was some yellowing at the hem and the zipper was completely shot, and one of the lace panels along the back had separated from the underlining. But the bones of it were extraordinary. Corinne looked at Vivienne with an expression Vivienne recognized, the look of someone bracing for bad news. "Can it be saved?" Corinne asked. Vivienne picked up the hem carefully and looked at the seam allowance. She held the fabric to the light. She ran her thumb along the lace panel to see where the separation started and where it stopped. "Yes," she said, "it can absolutely be saved." Corinne let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for a long time. They spent an hour together that afternoon just talking through the work, what needed to be done, in what order, what was structural, and what was cosmetic. Vivienne showed her where the zipper would be replaced and how the lace panel could be retacked without disturbing the original design. Corinne started to relax. She asked questions. She stopped holding her breath. When they were done and Vivienne had given her the timeline and the estimate, Corinne looked around the room. At the shelves and the machine and the plant in the terracotta pot on the sill, still growing, bigger now. And she said, "How long have you been doing this?" Vivienne thought about it. "About 8 months," she said, "in this room, but I think I've been learning for much longer than that." The dress came back 3 weeks later, transformed. The zipper was invisible. The lace panel was secure. The yellowing at the hem had been lifted with a careful hand wash, and where it hadn't lifted completely, Vivienne had done something clever with the hem finish that you'd only notice if you knew to look. The whole thing had been pressed with a ham and a cloth, the way Eleanor had taught her, or tried to teach her, when she was 12 years old and couldn't be bothered. Corinne put the dress on in the back room, and when she came out, she stood in front of the long mirror Vivienne had hung on the back of the door. She didn't say anything for a minute. She just looked. Then she said, "My grandmother would have loved this." Vivienne straightened the back panel and checked the zipper one more time. "I think she would have," she said. "There's a light on at the house on Calder Avenue most evenings now. Not a porch light exactly. It's the lamp in the sewing room window, the one with the yellowed shade from the storage unit, that Vivienne replaced with a white linen shade that lets the light glow soft through the glass. You can see it from the street. Patty next door says she finds it comforting. Vivienne didn't plan it that way. She didn't sit down and decide to become her mother, or to continue what her mother had started, or to make a statement about legacy and inheritance, and what we owe each other. She just kept opening the door. She kept sitting down at the machine. She kept making the note in the journal when a note needed to be made. The journal is getting full. There's maybe 20 pages left. She's been thinking about what she'll do when she reaches the last one. She thinks she'll get another journal, plain, brown covered, same size, and start the next volume exactly where this one ends. She'll date it and name it and set it on the shelf next to Eleanor's, and someday, if she gets around to it, she'll tell whoever comes after her what it means. Or maybe she won't need to explain it. Maybe they'll read it and understand, the way Vivienne had understood, kneeling on the cold floor of Unit 114 on a Tuesday in October, that some things don't need explaining. Some things just need continuing. "You look carefully at what's broken," Eleanor had written, "and you start with what you can reach. The light stays on."